Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that we're live streaming for this exciting Condor 10th anniversary celebration. It's a real pleasure to be here and really nice to see some friends from Chile and Argentina and Uruguay joining us today. So in our session, we're going to be looking at the unique climatic influences that really kind of make South American wine. And of course, we're going to be, let me just submit Mariana, we're going to be exploring the wines of Argentina, Uruguay and Chile. And I've got several winemakers here who are going to take us through a journey and explain some of the climate conditions. So before we get started, I'll give you a brief introduction. I've got Pablo Sanchez, who is the winemaker at Familia Velasco. Hello, how is everything in Mendoza? I hope it's nice for you there.
Hi, Amanda. Well, today is pretty cold. It seems we will have some snow storms at the mountains today.
Ooh, okay, well, it's nice and warm here in England. And we've got Karim also in Mendoza, who is the winemaker of Alto Cedro and Alandes, along with some other of your kind of stable of labels. Over in Uruguay, we've got Gaby Zimmer, who is a sommelier based in Montevideo, but today is representing Familia Traversa. We have Benuifi from Chile, who's going to be talking about all of Chile. And he's got many vineyards from Viña Renquigua, 1,000 hectares. So hopefully he'll give us a great overview. And hopefully we will have Mariana joining us from Finca Quara. Here we are, welcome. Nice to see you, Mariana. Excellent. So we're going to get started and look into kind of exploring some of the key kind of climate influences in Mendoza, which is obviously one of the real heartlands of South American wine, and perhaps the most important wine region in South America in terms of hectares under vine and production historically and also today. So Mendoza, we've got over 149,000 hectares, which is even more than Bordeaux. So I wanted, Pablo, if you can kind of give us an overview of why Mendoza, became this real heartland for wine production and what kind of climate influences make it this viticultural paradise.
Okay, perfect. Well, Mendoza is really a high altitude continental desert. We live in the foothill of the Andes, and we have a great diversity of regions, micro-regions with different climates, etc. For us, in general, the main fact of the Mother Nature that has a strong influence in the quality of the grapes is the altitude, because the altitude changes very quickly in a few kilometers, and we have some vineyards planted in the east region of Mendoza from 600, 700 meters, and we have another vineyards located in the Andes Mountains at 1,500 meters. But there exist many facts that has a positive things to the grapes. One of them is the altitude. Another winemakers like Karim or Mariana will talk about that. Another one is the latitude, but we have also the thermal amplitude, the sunlight intensity, and the water, which is a very strong concept here because we live in a desert and we depend on the water. Imagine in Mendoza, we have 330 days with sun, no clouds. That is very good for the quality of the grapes. And also we have about 250 millimeters, depends on the region, of rains during the summer. And that means we need to add or apply water to the vineyards. And for that reason, the snow in the mountain is very important for us, because from there we get the main resources or sources of water. Well, the east region, it was, in fact, it is the main region in Argentina, concentrate 45% of the total production of Mendoza, and Mendoza concentrates 70% of the national production of grapes. And that happened probably 150 years ago when the first immigrants for Europe came to Mendoza, and they established in the East region in Mendoza, in San Martin, Rivadavia, Santa Rosa, Junín counties. And many years later, they go to the foothill of the Andes in order to look for different regions. Here we are in the middle of the high altitude continental desert, and we are the largest wine region production in South America.
Excellent. So I wanted to kind of ask you about the movements of the family winery from kind of establishing yourselves in the East, and why the East was historically such a kind of fertile and beneficial land to grow grapes, and then why you've kind of moved a bit more towards the Yuko Valley and Luján for your wine production. And also, if anyone who's watching has any questions, then please do send them through, because this is supposed to be a dynamic conversation in which you can certainly grill any of the winemakers on your kind of climate questions. So Pablo, can you tell us a bit about your, how the winery has kind of moved and adapted their vineyards to different areas, looking for different profiles?
Exactly. Well, that happened 15 years ago when the family started to look for more diversity in the source of the grapes, and in order to get more complexity in the wines, in order to blend different regions, different grapes with different characteristics. And nowadays, about 30% of our production of grapes come from Luján de Cuyo and Yuko Valley. Sorry, the family manage at this moment 700 hectares of own vineyards, but we have more than 500 different vineyards, small vineyards to big vineyards in different areas, and that gives us the possibility to create more interesting wines. And we have some vineyards in the East region at 600 meters of altitude, and we have another vineyard in Yuko Valley at 1,500 meters. That is very interesting to see how the influence of the altitude, the diversity of soil composition, etc., give us different grapes that finally result in the quality of the wine when we blend the wines that come from different areas.
Excellent. And you're kind of well known for your white wine making, which obviously, most of the time we identify Argentina for its great red wines, but it's also producing some fabulous white wines. So can you give me a nice kind of real life example when you're making one of your white blends, or kind of picking grape varieties from different regions? Why might you kind of pick some white varieties in the East? Why might you kind of go to the Yuko Valley for others? What are you kind of using for your blend and your kind of winemaking palette?
Well, for winemakers, that is very interesting when you can produce a more interesting wine. For example, one clear example for us is our Chacabuco Viognier, and I produce something like 100,000 liters a year of Viognier, but that Viognier is made with grapes that come from the East valleys of Mendoza and Yuko Valley places. And the characteristics of the grapes are completely different. In the East region, where we have more it's a warmer region with less altitude, the grapes normally acquire a better level of maturity, a better concentration in sugar, less acidity. You can get more flowers, flavors, and a better balanced wine. And when you go up to the foothill of the Andes, you get more natural acidity, some citrus flavors, pineapple flavors, and that makes the blend of the wine very interesting because you have different components. When you blend different components, it's like instruments in an orchestra. You get a wonderful result.
We got some impromptu music there just to highlight the orchestra comparison. That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Pablo. Thank you for that great overview of Mendoza and the different climates within. We're now going to move over to Karim, who's going to zero in on the Yuko Valley for us, because obviously since 1999 you've been established in La Consulta and really kind of helped put that region on the map. Can you give us an overview of the Yuko Valley? And first of all, I'd like to kind of ask why we call it a valley, because it doesn't look like a very typical valley.
Well, it's as Pablo explained it very well, Mendoza is a big desert where only 4% of the total surface is planted. And the Yuko Valley is one of the four main regions along the east, the north, and the south areas. Yuko Valley itself is formed by 3 counties, and the main characteristics are the proximity to the water, the proximity to the mountains, and due to these characteristics, the high altitude and the strong influence of the weather. So the Yuko Valley is formed by 3 counties. You have Tupungato in the north and Tunuyán in the middle, split by Las Tunas River. And then you have Tunuyán and San Carlos County, split by the Tunuyán River. So all the 3 counties that you are watching right now on the map are a very well-known growing area. It's very old. It's part of the wine revolution that happened here in the 19th century that Pablo explained briefly. But here we have the same conditions that also happen in the rest of the country. It's a mixture of the proximity to the water, or when the water law attached the right of the water to the land. That's why the Yuko Valley became so popular, because all the immigrants start growing and farming in knowing that they will have water every year for every crop. The second was the train, and also the government that improved the quality, bringing French teachers in the 19th century. So the combination of those 3 things, plus the immigrants, especially the Italian immigrants that are very well established in the Yuko Valley, it was the reason that this very important and historical area developed very well.
Excellent. I love that, because you've brought in all the elements of terroir in terms of kind of culture, history, and people as being a key part of that. I really wanted to also look with you kind of focusing in on La Consulta and using it as an example of how you can get different flavor profiles for Malbec, for example, within the Yuko Valley. So can you, I'll pull up your map of La Consulta, and perhaps you can explain how the kind of climate influences the different parts of the vineyard, and how that will have a final impact on the flavor and profile of your wines.
Yes, sure. Well, those factors are also in La Consulta, but especially the Italian immigrants. La Consulta is a very particular part of the Yuko Valley. It's the blue and green area on your map, on the right map, but the one that we are watching from the east to the west, the big one on the left, it describes perfectly all the region and all the sub-appellations that we have there. The main thing that you have to understand is on the right you have the Tunuyán River, that it formed all this alluvial cone from the very west in Altamira to the lower lands in Chacón. And also includes another sub-regions like Lotes Barraquero or La Cañada. And on the very south, means your left, it's, for me, I like to say, as a joke, that is where the Patagonia it starts, because it's the coldest place in the world. We have penguins and yetis working there. It's called El Cepillo. El Cepillo, it's also a sub-region, but it's facing the southeast. But it doesn't belong to the alluvial cone. It's a colluvial formation, like 2 landslides together, one above the other one, between chockstone and sand. So El Cepillo is the only one that has it's a different formation, but also very high quality and unique characteristics. So here you have a very clear understanding, and also the size of the land, the size of the properties, it belongs to the Italian influence, because generation after generations, they've been transferring and keeping the land, and not only create a huge availability of high quality vineyards, but also create the concept of patrimony vineyards, because in La Consulta we have the original pre-phylloxera rootstocks that kept the identity, the original DNA that came from France, and it got developed over 150 years. So this is one of the last corners of the world where you can make wine using the material that we had 2 centuries ago.
Excellent. And before we start kind of moving beyond the Yuko Valley into different parts of Argentina, you mentioned El Sapio, which I think is a really nice example of actually how we can't just use altitude of the measure of how cold a region is. El Sapio, which is called the fridge, as a nickname, as you mentioned, with your yetis and your penguins, which don't exist there, in case anyone didn't get the sarcasm. But can you tell me why El Sapio is so much cooler than some of those other regions at higher altitude, which is perhaps contrary to what we might assume?
Mostly because it's facing the south, or here in the southern hemisphere, where it gets cooler. So any, not a classic reverse frost, but when we have wind from the south, those polar winds are coming from Patagonia, it hits El Cepillo on its face. So that's why the Malbec didn't got adapted very well. And the Spanish immigrant replaced the Malbec or fixed the problem, replacing the Malbec and using Tempranillo. That's why the second most well-adapted varietal in the area are the Tempranillos. And instead of using the regular line trellising system, they replace it by the Parral or Pergola system that also helps to keep the fruit farther from the ground and more protected. So you can find a lot of very old vine Tempranillo vineyards in that specific area.
Fantastic. That's really interesting. Thank you. And Karim, you're going to take us a little bit beyond Mendoza, just to kind of give us an idea about the impact of latitude before we move up to Cafayate with Mariana. So can you tell us a bit about your exploration with Alandes and your kind of looking into Rio Negro and also up to Cafayate, and how latitude impacts also the production of wine?
Well, the Alandes project, it says on its name, it's a winery that we start working in 2012, and instead of using the concept of being a terroir-driven winery, here we start using the Andes mountain range as the main formation, as an infinite territory that permits us to travel from different latitudes and different sides of the mountains to reach the interesting effect of the latitude instead of the altitude. I was also very interested about the Cafayate empanadas and the lamb from Patagonia. So we have to find an excuse or a reason to start traveling and driving along the country to eat different things compared with Mendoza. So imagine that in Cafayate or Salta province, your latitude is 26. Well, here in Mendoza is 37. So you have 7 degrees different between the extreme north and the center of the country. And Patagonia, you have, at least in Neuquén, Rio Negro Valley, you are at 38 degrees. So it's a huge difference, also 5 degrees different, where the effects of latitude combined with altitude, it generates also unique growing conditions. So in a country like, I will use my analogical map here. So from the extreme north here, the center of the country, and on the south, you can see how long you can drive and start sourcing fruit from different areas, keeping the same growing conditions. We still are very far away from the Atlantic Ocean influence, but also completely insulated from the Pacific influence, because the huge wall that split us from Chile permit us to continue keeping those continental weather without any ocean influence.
Excellent, super. And I'm sure that Benoit is going to talk a lot about driving considerable distances in Chile too. So that's a great kind of introduction to Chile as well. So Mariana, let's move up to Cafayate.
Sorry for the interruption, but also we are very interested about the Chilean empanadas. That is another asset from the country. So we're willing to start making wine in Chile only for the empanadas very soon.
Excellent.
With streams.
Wait for you.
Wonderful. So Mariana, if you want to unmute yourself And perhaps you can start to talk to us about your work in Cafayate. And you're not only kind of have worked at the altitude of Cafayate, I also believe you've worked at the altitude of Ningxia in China. So you've had different kind of altitude experiences around the world. What is the impact of altitude on grapes and in the vineyard, and kind of specifically looking at working in Cafayate? You'll have to unmute yourself. Let me see if I can do it from here.
Yes, here. Okay. So can you repeat, because I have a little bit problems of...
Yeah, can you tell us about the impact of altitude and how that kind of impacts the climate of Cafayate and how that impacts your viticulture there, and why it kind of works at this latitude?
Okay, as you say before, here, okay, we can plant the vineyards in this latitude because of the altitude. Okay, here we start in Cafayate is the lower part with 1,650 meters, and in Salta we can find vineyards more than 3,000 meters in the location of Molinos, there in the Colomé area. That condition of altitude, you can, with that condition, you can have a lot of differences in temperature in the day and in the night, sometimes 18, 20 degrees, the differences, but cool nights, that condition of cool nights is good for the polyphenol synthesis. Also here we have a lot of solar radiation and a lot of UV radiation. Whereas we have very dry winds, that's extreme conditions that makes very thick skins, polyphenols synthesis. So the wines here, red mainly, will have a lot of color, very high intensity of color, a lot of aromas. So you will have wines with a lot of structure given by the tannins. Torrontés is we can start talking about the varieties here. The main variety in white is Torrontés. There is a Criolla, Criolla that comes from the cross between Muscat of Alexandria and Listán Prieto, and it's very well adapted here in these soils, very deep soils. It's planted in a pergola system, are very, very vigorous plants, very big plants that are without rootstocks, and it's very aromatic. The wine is very aromatic. And what else? If we talk about Malbec, you can find here, a lot of color, very well structured in mouth, and we can find spicy notes, spicy and fruity.
Excellent. I think you've really kind of summarized some of the key characteristics that you get at altitude, with this much kind of fresher acidity and the intense color. There's nothing quite like tasting, seeing in the glass the Malbec from Cafayate, which is just a deep purple. It's almost black.
Yes.
We have a couple questions here that I'd like to ask before we move over to Chile. So I'd like our Argentinian winemakers to feel free. You're all born in Mendoza, so even if it's Mendoza, Mariano, you are welcome to jump into these questions. So our first one here is do you not think that people should understand a bit more that Mendoza is too big to just simplify climates? Do you think there's a way that we can perhaps have a climate, indication for Mendoza? Have you found a way to kind of communicate the diversity of climates you find in Mendoza?
Well, that is very interesting. Today, day by day, the wineries here in Mendoza are putting more focus in the concept of IG or geographical indication with the different areas and different regions. But as winemakers, when we travel around the world, in order to teach the people, we need to communicate. Mendoza is a high altitude continental desert, but it has a lot of different micro areas with different temperatures and different soil composition, etc., etc. That is a huge privilege that we have and a huge advance in order, if you compare with other regions in the world. But as Karim said before, we have more than 2,000 kilometers beside the foothill of the Andes with many different areas, and we need to educate more about that.
Excellent, thank you. That one on Pablo. And we've got some other questions, but they're more about South America, so we'll address those at the end, and everyone should feel free to jump in with more questions, and we should have some time for a Q&A at the end. But before we get to that stage, I'd like to move over the Andes. And now that we've discussed a lot about the kind of climate that the Andes gives us, the rain shadow it casts in Argentina, what is happening on the other side in Chile? Can you explain to us a bit about the kind of secrets of Chilean terroir, as you like to say, Benoit, and how that really kind of translates into the wines?
Okay, well, thank you, Amanda. Well, first, it's an honor for us and as a Vineyard King and as Benoit Fit, of course, to be present to you, to be present today with you. And of course, to talk about Chile. I'm not Chilean, sorry, I'm French, but I'm living in Chile for the last 21 years, since 1999. And for me, Chile is a beautiful country and also a paradise to growing grapes. We are really lucky. I'm probably one of the winemakers luckier in the world, because here in Chile, it's really easy to produce good wine. Why? Because we have almost perfect bunches every year at the moment of the harvest. And why we have those perfect bunches? It's really simple. We have two secrets in Chile. The first one, we have a dry season between mid of springtime till mid of autumn. That means almost no rains during this period. So that's, for a winemaker, imagine, for a viticulturalist, this is a perfect weather, perfect climate. And then, during the ripeness period, we have big thermic amplitude between night and day. So that's perfect to synthesize polyphenols, aromatic precursors, of course, to keep acidity. The plant's still working. We don't have any cut of maturity during the ripeness period. So for me, this is a perfect country to produce grapes, of course.
Excellent. I'm sure your French compatriots are going to completely disown you.
But look, Amanda, I changed my country because it's easier to work.
Much easier, I'm sure. Can you tell us a bit about the most interesting thing for me about Chile is that it's so long and so thin, and you've got such a kind of narrow, band of land between the impact from the coast, from the Pacific and the Andes, and the fact that Chile has kind of split its designations from Costa, Entre Cordilleras, Andes. Can you kind of give us a 101 on what the kind of coastal Entre Cordilleras, which is between mountain ranges, and the Andes, what that kind of means in terms of climate designations?
Look, first, Amanda, we have to put Chile in the world. I mean, this is a large country. This is 4,500 kilometers from north to south, the driest desert in the north, the Iceland in the south. But when we're talking about vineyards or wine, we're talking only about 800 kilometers in the central area of Chile. It's where we have the Mediterranean climate. To the map of the left, from the left, the first map from the left, you see two regions in green. Those regions are this map is the map of the climate in Chile. And of course, we see those two green regions. This is where we have the Mediterranean climate. And it's where we have the majority of the grapes in Chile. the vinifera, and the table grapes in Chile. Why? Because of course we have dry season, and of course we have the perfect conditions and the water to produce grapes there. Why? Of course, this is only 800 kilometers around. In this region, of course, we don't have too much difference between north and south. I mean, the latitude don't make too much difference. Of course, if we are going southern, we have more precipitation, and of course, drastically from Biobío to the south, we have a big climate change because we have more rain.
Mm-hmm.
But northern to Los Angeles in the south, yes, we have Los Angeles too. This is beautiful.
Los Angeles.
But from Los Angeles to the north, we have, of course, less rain, Mediterranean climate, and there is not big difference between, for example, the Central Depression Maipo and the Central Depression Maule. This is almost 250 kilometers, and we don't have any difference, or only few differences. But if we are talking about longitudes, I mean Andes, Central Depression, and coastal, Pacific coast, we have big difference. And why? Because we have big influence, of course, closer to the Andes, the influence of the mountains, so cool climate, to the opposite, close to the Pacific coast, the Humboldt current coming from the south, this cool current, making also a cool climate, and in the Central Depression, high insolation, warm weather. So this is what we are. Northern area called Casablanca, close to Santiago, comparing with a Syrah from Sagrada Familia, this Curicó area. Between both vineyards, we have 250 kilometers. Of course, one northern than the other. So logically, the northern vineyard could be riper, warmer in terms of wine, and the southern fresher. But big difference. In the north, Casablanca, it's in the coast, and Sagrada Familia, it's in the Central Depression. And if we compare the table, the Excel, no, it's not Excel now. If we compare in our presentation, we'll see the two different vineyards. So we compare two different vertical tray system, two Syrahs, one from Sagrada Familia, planted 15 years ago, the other one from Casablanca, planted 11 years ago, more or less the same yield, low yield, 10 tons per hectare, 8.5 in Casablanca. But first, the big difference. When we harvest, as a company, we are looking for freshness in our wine. We are trying to keep the best relation of fresh maturity and total acidity content or natural acidity content. So in Sagrada Familia, this year, 2021, we harvest this Syrah March 9. And Casablanca, the other Syrah, end of April 20. So this is more than 1 month difference of harvest. In terms of wine, we can see that we have big difference in terms of wine. Even if we are harvesting the Syrah longer the wine through the mouth, of course. And Chile and Sagrada Familia, this is a different Syrah, riper, ginier, plums, black pepper, more volume, full-bodied, fresh in the entrance, but not like, of course, Casablanca. Casablanca is not sour, but it's in between, fresh and acidulate. So 2 different type of Syrah, 2 different type of wines, same variety, different climates.
Wonderful. I think that's a really nice comparison of looking at Casablanca being cooler in the north by the coast, and then obviously kind of warmer in the south. Really nice, lovely way of kind of explaining Chile. Thank you very much for that. Before we run out of time, we have to get to Uruguay, and I still want to have time for some Q&A. So let's move to Uruguay, which is also has a maritime influence, but a completely different maritime influence. So whereas in the Pacific, I don't think I've ever really got in past my
annual medium temperature. And also, as Benoit was talking, I was thinking about the rain in our country are more distributed through the year, and that's why we have a maritime climate other than the Mediterranean that Chile has. Our climate is actually more comparable to Bordeaux than to the rest of the South American countries. And also we have large bodies of water like the Rio Uruguay, that this is our limit with Argentina. And also we have the Rio de la Plata, that is the widely river in the world, that it's actually an estuary, that the sweet water of the river mixes with the salty water of the ocean, and that influences also the climate in our country. And well, we have night, in the night it's cool. As you were talking about the beaches, and I remember when I go to the beach in the summer, Uruguayans know that we have to take a coat to see the sunset, for example, in the beach, because it's cooler. And this is good for wine growing, because the slow ripening of the grapes ensures that we have a good acidity and natural. And that is one of the biggest differences of Uruguayan climate influence in vine growing, the fresher acidity that we can get in our wines.
Excellent. I'd really like to explore with you some of the other kind of key stylistic differences we get from Uruguayan wine versus the, typically kind of more Argentinian or Chilean wines in terms of alcohol, tannins, acid, and if perhaps you can, frame, give us a taste of Uruguayan wine virtually, that would be great.
Yes, of course. Well, we already talked about the acidity and the freshness of Uruguayan wines. That is one of our most important trademarks. We need the freshness to balance the intensity of aromas and flavors that we get in the grapes, in the wines. And also we need to balance with the good levels of alcohol we achieve, and of course with the tannins in the case of the red wines, especially when we talk about Tana, that is our flagship grape and the most planted grape in the country that has good levels of tannins. So we need that freshness to to compensate the tannins that we get in Tanat. Regarding styles, our Uruguayan wines are most inclined to the New World approach to fruitier and fresher styles of wine.
Okay, super. And you're representing Familia Traversa, which is based in the heartland of Uruguayan wine in Montevideo and Canelones. Can you tell us a bit about why that was such a suitable place, or why that really kind of developed as Uruguay's main wine region, and perhaps kind of linking into the climate, but also what assets it has as a wine region?
Yeah. Well, at first, when immigrants came to Uruguay, mostly from Spain and Italy, as Kagin mentioned in Argentina, it's the same situation. Montevideo, Canelones were the selected area to plant vineyards because of the proximity to the port. It was where commercially things were happening there, and also because of the proximity to the Rio de la Plata. And with the experience of those viticulture and the wines they were producing, more vine growers started to plant vineyards in the area. That now it's called the metropolitan region, is Canelones, is Montevideo and San Jose. And apart from the proximity to the Rio de la Plata and the Atlantic Ocean as well, well, the soils are limestone, are clay, and it has an important percentage of calcareous material. That's why, for example, Tanat grows so well in this region. Is where Familia Traversa, the winery I'm representing for, it's in the Condor's portfolio, and it's one of the most experienced wineries in the country, and it has its vineyards and its wineries also in this region, in the metropolitan region.
Excellent, thank you so much for that, Gabby. That was a nice introduction to Uruguay's very different maritime climate. So we've got time for a couple of the questions that have come in. And the first I think we should start with is irrigation. I'll skip you on this one, Gabby, because Uruguay is the only wine country here that won't need to be irrigated with your much higher rainfall. But can I open it up to the different winemakers here about your method of irrigation and how that affects the vines? So the question here is, what forms of irrigation do you use, and how does that affect your vineyards in a comparison between different forms? Does anyone want to take it? Pablo, how about you?
Okay.
I bet you've got at least two different systems of irrigation going on. So can you tell us about the main irrigation systems in Mendoza?
Well, the main irrigation system in Mendoza is still the flood irrigation, mainly in the ancient vineyards in the East region and some places in Yuko Valley also, but little by little is growing the drip irrigation system, because drip irrigation allows us to get a better control on the grapes, finally in the quality of the grapes, in the yield per hectare, etc., etc. But for example, in the east region of Mendoza, where we have more sandy soils, mainly in San Martin, Junín, Rivadavia, we need a lot of water in order to keep the vines living. And well, little by little, the most modern vineyards are introducing the drip irrigation concept and the concept of precisely irrigation. As agronomists, they try to get the information of the vineyard about when they need the water and how much they need in order to make a proper irrigation. But for sure, in the future, the water will be a problem. We could have another chat on another conference about this problem with the water, because year by year, global warming is making some troubles around the world, not only here in Argentina, and less by year by year is less the amount of snow in the mountains that we have. And the glaciers in the mountain are going back. No, they are not growing, and we are losing the water resources at the mountains.
Do you think that Mendoza will eventually transform all of its vineyards to drip in order to be more sustainable, or do you think that's not a possibility, considering how much it's still over 50% of Mendoza's vineyards are by flood, aren't they?
I don't know, Karim, you want to answer, or I keep talking?
No, the main thing that is shared on this side of the Andes, and it's important to highlight that it's here we irrigate by flooding the land, not because we waste the water. Here we protect the water more than any other place in the world, but it's the only way to grow something in the middle of the desert. So don't think that we are not protecting the water here. The irrigation system, all the canals, the reservoir dams, the distribution dams, it's a very sophisticated system that will continue permitting Mendoza to be an oasis in the middle of the desert. Also, don't forget that the flood irrigation kept us safe from the phylloxera attack. That's why in the 19th century we survived to phylloxera. thanks that the flood irrigation keeps the insect during a period sunk on the earth. So we are. It's very important for us here. The main thing it's about the slopes and where the rivers comes. All the irrigation down the rivers, especially waters down to the east, continue being flood irrigated. But thanks to the drip irrigation, and this is another point to highlight, we create new growing areas. So we're also taking water, but not from the river. We are drilling, and we here to get water, you have to drill more than 100 meters underground to get good quality of water. So imagine how expensive and how difficult it is to keep that water. And all these drip irrigated new vineyards at the west of the country, at the west of Mendoza, and waters up the rivers are the new developed areas that are also shining and showing new territories to discover.
Excellent, fabulous. We're running out of time, but Benoit, can you quickly tell us what irrigation system you use mainly in Chile?
Okay, when I arrived in Chile 20 years ago, it was floating everywhere. But since the last 15 years, we are only dropping irrigation. And of course, it's because we have less and less water in the central region of Chile. And it's why all the companies, Chilean companies, are looking to the south now. So now we are all looking for the south because probably into the next 20 years, the Chilean vineyard will move from the north to the south.
Absolutely. I think you've touched on a really important aspect of kind of climate change and how it is changing the wine regions of South America. So thank you for ending on that. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, although there's so much more we could cover when talking about the climates of South America. But thank you so much to all of you for illustrating quite beautifully the very different climates and wine styles that we have in South America, and also showing the kind of great diversity that Lee and Maria have put together at Condor in order to kind of bring these flavors to the UK. So thank you very much for your time. Thanks to everyone for joining us, and we look forward to enjoying the rest of the day together and celebrating 10 years and hopefully to 10 years more of Condor wines. So thank you everyone for your time, and salud.
Salud.
Thank you.
Cheers.